For a moment, I felt my breath hitch the way it did that day. The cold air of that courtroom, the way his attorney glanced at me like I was already defeated, and that quiet, arrogant grin he thought would break me. If only he knew what was coming. Hi everyone, I'm Madeline. Welcome to Voices of Kaitlyn Grit, where every single day I share a new story of resilience, boundary setting, and rebirth. If you subscribe right now and hit that like button, it would truly mean the world to me. It helps these stories reach more women who need them. So let me bring you back to where it all began. Not to the courtroom, not to the unraveling, but to a quieter time in my life when I still believed the best in people, sometimes to my own detriment. Because long before that smirk, before the lies and the paperwork and the endless nights staring at the ceiling, there was a version of me who genuinely believed she had found her forever. I was 26, working at a small architectural drafting firm in a little riverside town. My days were predictable then. Coffee exactly the way I liked it, bus rides where I'd read half a novel before I even reached my stop, coworkers who brought their homemade muffins every Friday. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and at the time, steady felt like safety. That was when I met Landon. His name still sits strangely on my tongue, like something familiar but faded. Landon wasn't the kind of man who made a loud entrance. He had this quiet charm, the kind that crept in gently, soft-spoken, attentive, almost overly considerate in a way that made me feel seen. I remember the first conversation we ever had. He'd come into the firm because his cousin was one of our contractors, and he lingered near my desk longer than he needed to. He asked what I was reading. I was surprised he recognized the author. Most people didn't. Looking back now, I can see how eager I was for connection. I had come out of a long, emotionally draining relationship the year before, and I was still trying to rebuild parts of myself I hadn't realized were broken. When someone like Landon shows up, gentle voice, earnest eyes, a steady attention that makes you feel like you're the only person in the room, it's easy to mistake that for something deeper, something trustworthy. But I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that his presence felt like warmth in a life that had been a little too cold for a little too long. We started talking more, first casually, then regularly. He dropped by the office under the pretense of asking his cousin questions, though the cousin later admitted Landon didn't need anything from him at all. One afternoon, he invited me out for coffee. Not dinner, coffee. I liked that. It didn't feel like he was trying to sweep me off my feet. It felt simple, respectful. I didn't know that early gentleness was the first act of a very carefully curated performance. But again, that comes later. In those early days, I was simply hopeful. I remember sitting across from him at the cafe on Brighton Street, swirling the foam on my latte while he told me about his childhood in Cedar Hill, how he grew up with two older brothers who pushed him to be tougher, more competitive. He said it with a laugh, but there was a flicker of something else, something I couldn't place then. I should have paid more attention to that flicker, but when you want to believe the best in someone, you talk yourself out of those tiny warnings. You convince yourself they're nothing. And that's really why I'm sharing this story. Not just the courtroom, not just the smirk, but the steps that lead you there, the ones so subtle you barely feel them. Because nobody wakes up one day in a legal battle wondering how a marriage fell apart. It starts with moments, small ones you brush aside because you love someone or because you want to love them. So before everything unraveled, before I found myself standing alone against him, thinking the world had tilted against me, there were days when I truly believed we were building a life together, a good life, a hopeful life. I wish I could tell you that the early months with Landon were perfect, that they felt like something out of a warm, quiet movie where two people discover each other gently, without shadows lurking in the background. And honestly, for a little while, it really did look that way. After a few months of dating, Landon and I settled into a rhythm that felt comfortable. We cooked dinner together on Fridays, usually something simple. He loved making skillet chicken with rosemary, and I'd handle the sides. On Sundays, we'd walk through the park near my apartment, where the river curved around a little patch of willow trees. He'd hold my hand without saying much, but it always felt intentional, like he was quietly telling me he cared. It's strange how, in hindsight, some of those quiet moments weren't tenderness. They were control disguised as calm. But at the time, those differences didn't stand out. They blended into the early glow of new love. I remember the first time he met my best friend, Delaney. She's one of those people whose presence fills a room, bright, engaging, always ready with a question or a laugh. She hugged me tight when she walked into the restaurant and then extended a hand toward Landon. He didn't really take it. He gave her a half shake, barely looked at her, and then rested his arm around the back of my chair like he needed to make something clear. At the time, I brushed it off. I told myself he was shy. Landon wasn't the type to jump into conversations with strangers, and I understood that. But Delaney gave me a look later, one of those subtle raised eyebrow looks, as if she sensed something was off. I laughed it off. He's just reserved, I told her. But the truth? Something inside me had tightened for a moment. Still, the relationship moved forward. Life moved forward. 9 months in, he proposed. It wasn't grand or elaborate. He wasn't a grand gesture kind of man. He asked me in my living room on a rainy night while we were folding laundry. I remember the way he looked up at me, almost nervous, holding a small silver ring he said he'd picked out after work. There was something touching about the simplicity of it, and because I was still trying desperately to believe that calmness was love, I said yes. The wedding was small. My parents lived out of state and couldn't make it, and his family didn't believe in big celebrations, as he called them. But I invited a few close friends, and we had a reception in a little garden hall with fairy lights strung between the trees. I wore a simple ivory dress. He wore a charcoal gray suit. People said we looked content, and I was content, or I thought I was, until shortly after the honeymoon. That's when the first real red flags started showing. It began with comments, not harsh ones, not outright criticism, more like subtle corrections that made me feel like I had said or done something slightly wrong. If I told a long story at dinner, he'd later mention that it was a bit much or that I didn't need to share everything. If I spent time with Delaney, he'd make quiet remarks about how she influenced me too much or was a little dramatic. One night, after I came home from a work gathering, he said, "You talk differently around them, like you're trying too hard." I remember freezing for a moment because I didn't know what he meant. I hadn't felt any different, but suddenly I found myself replaying the entire evening, wondering if I'd somehow embarrassed him. That was the first time I apologized for something I didn't understand, and he accepted that apology a little too easily. Then there were the finances. We had agreed early on to split things fairly, rent, utilities, groceries. But after the wedding, he started suggesting we combine everything to make it easier. I didn't see anything wrong with the idea. Married couples combine finances all the time. But when I asked about his accounts, he hesitated. A slight pause, a thin smile. "I'll handle it," he said. "You don't need to worry about the boring parts." Something about that phrasing stuck with me, but again, I wanted peace, not confrontation. The turning point, the moment I should have paid attention to but didn't, happened on a quiet Wednesday evening. I was cooking dinner and my phone buzzed with a message from a coworker reminding me about a project deadline. Landon glanced at the screen from across the room and his expression changed just slightly. "Who's that?" he asked. I told him. He nodded, but his voice had this thin edge to it when he said, "You're always on your phone when we're home. Seems like someone's always trying to get your attention." It wasn't true. Anyone close to me knows I'm not a big phone person, but the way he said it made me question myself. And then he added, "I just miss when you were more present." Looking back, that was not love. It was conditioning, a slow erosion of my confidence disguised as care. But the pattern wasn't clear yet. It never is at first. We still had good days, days when he held me close on the couch while we watched old documentaries, days when he helped me fix a broken cabinet door or brought home a little bouquet of daisies just because. Those moments made me second-guess every unsettling instinct. They made me believe the tension was my own fault. This is how these situations happen. You don't fall into them suddenly. You slide into them quietly, one explanation, one apology, one compromised boundary at a time. As months passed, the tension grew. His comments grew sharper, his expectations grew more rigid, and I became smaller without noticing it, adjusting myself constantly so he wouldn't frown, wouldn't sigh, wouldn't accuse me of something I wasn't doing. But all of that was still just the beginning, because the betrayal, the thing that shattered everything I thought I knew about him, was still ahead. And when it came, it didn't just hurt. It pulled the floor from under me. If I had to pinpoint the moment things truly shifted, the moment I stopped feeling like a partner and started feeling like a problem, would be the night Landon came home late with no explanation. Not a little late, not working late, just late, with that strange distance in his eyes that made my stomach tighten before he even said a word. It was early autumn. I remember that because the windows were cracked open and I could hear the first rustling of dry leaves collecting along the sidewalk. I'd made a simple pasta for dinner and kept reheating it, waiting for the sound of his car. But when he finally walked through the door, well past 10 o'clock, he didn't smell like the garage where he claimed he'd been working overtime. He smelled like someone else's perfume. I didn't want to believe that thought. I pushed it away so quickly it almost hurt. I told myself maybe someone at work wore a strong scent, maybe he'd been near a customer, maybe anything but what my intuition was screaming. But intuition is rarely wrong, and mine had been whispering for months before it finally raised its voice. I asked him gently where he'd been. He didn't even look up. "I told you, the shop," he muttered as he kicked off his boots. His tone was clipped, impatient, not tired, annoyed, like the simple act of me asking was an accusation. "Landon," I said more softly, "it's really late. I just worried." He didn't respond. He just walked past me into the living room, sat on the couch, and turned on the TV. No acknowledgement, no affection, not even a lie crafted well enough to land softly. I sat down beside him, cautiously. "Did something happen today?" He sighed, the kind of long, dismissive exhale that makes you feel foolish for just speaking. "You make everything so dramatic. I had a long day. Can I just watch something in peace?" I nodded, even though every part of me felt tight and unsettled. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, but the next morning I found a receipt on the kitchen counter, one he must have emptied from his pockets without thinking. It was from a little wine bar downtown, time-stamped 8:59 p.m., right around the time I was warming the pasta for the third time. My heart sank, but I didn't confront him. Not then. I wasn't ready to hear the answer, and I was still clinging to the hope that this was just a misunderstanding. That's one of the cruelest things about betrayal. You often sense it long before you're ready to see it clearly. The small shifts kept adding up. He stopped texting me during the day. He started guarding his phone, angling the screen away from me even when he was just scrolling through the news. He became impatient, almost resentful whenever I asked how his day had gone. And then came the first real fracture. One Saturday morning, I found myself cleaning the living room while Landon slept in. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, once, then again. I didn't reach for it. I didn't snoop. I wasn't trying to invade his privacy. But when I glanced down, I accidentally caught sight of the name lighting up on the screen. Harper S. I didn't know a Harper. He had never mentioned a Harper. The message preview only showed 2 words, last night. My throat tightened. I remember staring at the screen, feeling that horrible sensation of the ground shifting under me. When Landon walked into the room, still half asleep, I didn't ask who she was, not immediately. Instead, I asked if he was okay. His response came so quickly, so defensively, that it answered the question I hadn't even asked yet. Why? Did something happen? What are you implying? He snatched up his phone and turned away from me. I just asked if you're okay, I whispered. But he wasn't listening. He was too busy locking his screen, too busy putting distance between us, emotionally, physically, in every way a person can. 2 days later, everything unraveled at once. I was at work when I got a call from our bank. A gentle voice told me there were several large withdrawals from our joint account, withdrawals I hadn't made. My stomach dropped. I left work early and drove home, my hands shaking the entire way. And when I stepped inside, I found Landon sitting on the couch, elbows on his knees, his expression oddly blank, almost expectant. "We need to talk," he said. But the talk wasn't what I thought it would be. He didn't confess. He didn't apologize. He didn't even acknowledge the withdrawals. Instead, he told me, calmly, coldly, that he wasn't happy anymore, that he felt suffocated, that he needed space to figure himself out, and worst of all, that he thought it would be best for me to spend some time at my friend Delaney's place so things could cool down. I remember standing there, staring at him, barely able to understand the words. What are you saying?" He shrugged. "I'm saying this isn't working. You're always emotional. You overthink everything. I can't do it anymore." I felt something inside me crack. Not a clean break, but a splintering. "Landon," I whispered, "what's really going on?" He gave the smallest smirk. Not the full one he'd later wear in court, but a preview. "You'll make this easier on yourself if you don't dig." Those words replayed in my head for months afterward. If you don't dig. As if truth were something dangerous. As if I didn't deserve it. That night, he didn't come home. He didn't call. He didn't text. I barely slept. I sat on the edge of the bed with the lamp on, staring at the door. I felt the kind of fear that doesn't feel dramatic. It feels hollow, quiet, like your body is bracing for a blow you can't see coming. The next morning, I packed a small bag and went to Delaney's. When she opened the door and saw the look on my face, she didn't ask anything. She just hugged me and pulled me inside. For 2 weeks, I stayed with her, while Landon's silence stretched like a dark cloud. But during those 2 weeks, I learned everything. It started when I finally opened our bank statements. Then I checked our credit card. Then I checked the emails we shared for billing. And there it was. Charges to hotels he had never mentioned, dinner receipts from places he'd never taken me, weekend purchases made in towns he never said he visited. And in one of the statements, a second credit card I didn't know existed, one he'd opened using our joint information. My name was on that card. I had never touched it. The total balance was staggering. I felt sick, not heartbroken. Sick, like betrayal had settled into my bones. But the worst part came 3 days later. I received a message from an unknown number with a single line. "I thought you should know he isn't who you think he is." Attached was a photo. Landon, smiling. his arm around a woman I instantly recognized from the text preview weeks earlier. Harper. They looked comfortable, familiar, like I had been out of the picture for a long time. I remember covering my mouth with my hand because the sound that came out of me didn't feel human. The days after that blurred together. I cried. I tried to eat but couldn't. I stared at the ceiling at Delaney's place, wondering how everything I had known, everything I had trusted, could be so violently overturned. And then the letters started arriving. Not from him, from lawyers. Landon had filed for separation and was demanding financial compensation from me. The withdrawals, the secret credit card, the hotel stays, he was claiming I was responsible for half because we were married. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't understand how someone could betray you and then try to make you legally pay for your own pain. That was the moment everything inside me changed. The grief hardened into resolve. The fear sharpened into clarity. The heartbreak ignited into something stronger. Because if he wanted a battle, he was going to get one. And that battle, every twist, every blow, every small victory I clawed my way toward, is what happened in that courtroom where he smirked at me.
If there's one thing I wish someone had told me before stepping into that courtroom for the first time, it's this. Nothing prepares you for how personal a legal battle feels, especially when the person sitting across from you once promised to love you. The weeks leading up to the first hearing were some of the hardest of my life. I was still staying with Delaney, still sorting through the emotional wreckage of discovering not only the affair, but the debt he dragged my name into without my knowledge. Every morning I woke up with this heavy ache in my chest, like I was still waiting to understand how any of this was real. But there's something strange that happens when you're pushed to your breaking point. You learn you can stretch further than you ever imagined. And I stretched, I pushed, I fought to stay grounded. The first step was finding an attorney. I didn't have much money, I'd never been wealthy to begin with, but I had enough saved to at least schedule consultations. The first 2 attorneys I met with talked to me like I was fragile glass, sympathetically but without much confidence that I could win against the mountain of financial claims he was filing. But the third attorney, she changed everything. Her name was Rowan Callahan. Sharp eyes, steady voice, the kind of woman who took in every detail before speaking. When I finished telling her everything, every debt, every withdrawal, every piece of evidence, I expected her to sigh like the others had. Instead, she leaned back, tapped her pen once, and said, "You have a stronger case than he does. Don't let his arrogance fool you." It was the first time in months that the ground beneath me felt even slightly stable. Rowan helped me organize all the documents, every statement, every receipt, every photo of charges I never authorized. She told me to stay calm, to stay precise, and most of all, to stop apologizing every time I described something painful. "You didn't cause this," she said, "so don't take ownership of damage you didn't create." Hearing that, it softened something inside me. The first hearing. The morning of the first court appearance, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my coffee. Delaney drove me because I was too anxious to trust myself behind the wheel. I remember staring out the window as we pulled into the parking lot, this big gray building with columns that felt too heavy, too cold for something as intimate as the dismantling of a marriage. Inside, everything smelled faintly of old carpet and paper. My heartbeat felt loud enough that I wondered if people could hear it. And then I saw him. Landon stood near the entrance with his attorney, a tall man named Douglas who looked like he practiced his smirks in the mirror. Landon had a confidence about him that made my stomach twist. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't remorseful. He looked entertained, like this was all just some tedious formality he had already decided he would win. He looked at me the same way he had that night he told me I shouldn't dig, a quiet, smug superiority. I turned away quickly, trying to steady my breath as Rowan guided me toward a bench. "You're going to stay composed," she whispered. "Let him be the one who overplays his hand. Men like him always do." She was right, but it took time for me to see it clearly. When we were finally called inside, I remember the judge, a woman named Judge Ellison, taking in both sides with sharp, assessing eyes. She didn't seem easily swayed, and that gave me a thread of hope to hold on to. Douglas stood first, launching into a speech that sounded rehearsed. He painted Landon as a misunderstood husband, overwhelmed by emotional volatility at home, and burdened financially because I supposedly handled the money poorly. I sat there, listening to lie after lie, my chest tightening with each one. Rowan placed a steady hand near mine, not touching, just reminding me she was there. Then Douglas said something that made heat rise to my face. "Your Honor, my client provided for this marriage, and Mrs. Renning," he gestured carelessly toward me, "became increasingly irresponsible with funds. These debts reflect mutual decisions." I felt something snap inside me. Not anger, not grief. Something like clarity. Because I knew the truth. I knew the timeline. I knew every withdrawal he'd hidden, every charge he'd made with that secret credit card. And finally, I felt myself sit up straighter. When Rowan rose to speak, her voice was calm but carried an unmistakable undercurrent of steel. "Your Honor, we have documentation showing that the majority of the financial charges were made by Mr. Renning alone, many during dates and hotel stays that Mrs. Renning can prove she was not present for." She handed a thick binder to the judge, page after page, hotel receipts, transfers, timestamps. I watched Landon's expression shift just slightly. The smirk didn't fully disappear, but it wavered. That gave me the strength to breathe again. The weeks that followed. Because legal battles aren't won in one moment. They stretch, they twist, they drain you slowly. There were more hearings, more statements, more disclosures. Every time my phone buzzed with an email from Rowan or the court clerk, my stomach tightened. Some weeks I barely slept. Other weeks I threw myself into gathering evidence, old texts, bank alerts, screenshots I'd taken months earlier when something felt off but I didn't understand why. Landon, meanwhile, doubled down. He filed claim after claim. He accused me of wasting marital funds. He said I'd emotionally abandoned him. He tried to argue that staying with Delaney was evidence that I'd walked out on him. It was exhausting. It was infuriating, but it was also clarifying, because I began to see him not as the partner I once loved, but the man he truly was. A man who'd rather burn everything down than take responsibility for his actions. A man who built a relationship on convenience and control, not love. The turning point came during the deposition. In depositions, the truth has nowhere to hide. You sit across from each other with attorneys at your sides. No judge, no audience, just 4 people in a room where every word is recorded. He had to answer questions under oath. And for the first time, he looked uncomfortable. Rowan began slowly, almost gently. "Mr. Renning, can you confirm the dates of the withdrawals from your joint account?" He shifted, glancing at Douglas. "Yes," he said, too quickly. "And can you explain why several of these expenditures occurred on nights your wife was working late, but you claimed to be home?" He hesitated. My breath caught. Douglas interrupted, objecting on vague grounds, but Rowan pressed on. Page after page, she showed him charges, hotel stays, dinners, the second credit card. He finally snapped, raising his voice. "She wasn't there for me. She was always at that job or with her friends. I needed something else." Something else. He said it like it excused everything. And then he said the line that destroyed the last illusion I had about who he was. "She should have known I wasn't happy. She should have fixed it." As if betrayal were my job to prevent. As if loyalty were optional for him. As if the debt he racked up behind my back was somehow a consequence of my imperfections. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just felt myself go very still. And I think he saw it,
that stillness, because his face tightened. He knew. In that moment, he knew he'd lost whatever lingering hold he thought he had on me. The final hearing. Months of evidence, months of unraveling truth from lies, months of rebuilding small pieces of myself quietly, privately, while the case crawled forward. Then came the final hearing, the day I would see that full smirk again, the one from the line that began this entire story. He smirked as I stood alone in court, but I had the last laugh. I wore a simple navy dress, nothing dramatic, nothing that screamed for attention. I wanted to look like myself, the woman I was rediscovering. When I walked into the courtroom, he glanced at me and smirked, a slow, self-satisfied grin, as if he already knew the outcome, as if he still owned the narrative, as if I were standing there alone. But I wasn't alone. I had Rowan. I had truth. I had the version of myself that had survived months of emotional wreckage and had grown stronger because of it. Judge Ellison opened the session. Douglas launched into another speech about financial responsibility and reasonable division of marital debt. Then Rowan stood. "Your Honor, the evidence overwhelmingly shows that Mr. Renning acted independently, deceptively, and in ways that financially compromised Mrs. Renning without her knowledge or consent." She laid it all out, calm, factual, irrefutable. And then came the moment, the one I will never forget for the rest of my life. Judge Ellison turned to Landon, her expression flat but unmistakably firm. "Mr. Renning, based on the documentation and your own statements, I find that the debts in question were incurred solely by you. You will be responsible for their repayment. Furthermore, the court grants Mrs. Renning's request to be removed from all joint accounts and obligations. She bears no financial responsibility for the charges you accumulated." He blinked, stunned. The smirk vanished completely this time. "And," the judge continued, "given the evidence of deception and misuse of marital funds, the court grants Mrs. Renning compensatory support for the duration of the separation process." Compensatory support, a legal way of saying, you hurt her, you lied, you drained her resources. You don't get to walk away from that without consequence. Landon's jaw tightened. He whispered something harsh to Douglas, who looked equally blindsided. I didn't smile. I didn't look victorious. I just breathed deeply for the first time in months, because that was the moment I realized the truth. I had survived him. I had outlasted him. I had reclaimed myself, and he knew it. He glanced at me once more as we gathered our things. No smirk this time, no arrogance, just frustration masked behind a thin attempt at indifference. But I didn't look back again. I walked out of that courtroom with Rowan beside me and a weight lifting from my shoulders that I didn't even know how to describe. That was the last time I ever saw him. When the judge read her ruling, I didn't cheer. I didn't even smile right away. I just felt this slow, steady warmth rise in my chest, the kind that comes when you finally exhale after holding your breath for too many years. Colton looked stunned, not furious, not outraged, just stunned, as if the universe had personally betrayed him by refusing to bend the way he expected. I gathered my papers quietly. My attorney gave me a small nod, one of those "you earned this" nods, and I walked out of the courtroom without looking back. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't revenge, it was relief, a deep, anchoring relief that made my legs shake as soon as I reached the hallway. And in that hallway, beneath flickering fluorescent lights and the hum of distant conversations, I realized something. I hadn't just won a legal battle, I had reclaimed myself. The weeks that followed felt strangely peaceful, not perfect, not magical, not instantly healed, just peaceful. I moved into a small townhouse on the edge of town, nothing fancy, beige siding, creaky steps, a patch of grass that never quite decided whether it wanted to live or die. But it was mine, completely mine. I remember the first morning I woke up there. The sun streamed through the cheap blinds, dust floated in the air, and the place still felt faintly like the previous tenant's cinnamon-scented cleaner. But I lay there and thought, this is freedom. This is what it feels like. I started rediscovering parts of myself I had abandoned, my love for early morning walks, my habit of journaling before bed, my old hobby of restoring thrift store furniture. For the first time in years, my life wasn't shaped around surviving someone else's moods. And Landon, he tried to send a few messages, thinly veiled attempts to reel me into conversation, but I didn't respond. The boundary the court helped me enforce became a boundary I learned to honor emotionally, too. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't afraid. I just didn't care. And that, in its own quiet way, was the real victory. Healing in the real world. Healing wasn't glamorous. It didn't look like a movie montage with cheerful music and perfectly folded throw blankets. It looked like this. Me crying in the grocery store because a jar of pasta sauce slipped from my hands and shattered. Me sitting on the kitchen floor one night eating toast because I was too tired to cook. Me replaying old arguments in my head and then gently telling myself, "You're safe now." But it also looked like this. Laughing again, really laughing with my best friend Lainey over takeaway noodles. Letting myself believe compliments again when my coworker Claire told me I looked confident these days. Buying a new set of sheets because I wanted them, not because I needed permission. Little things, ordinary things, but they added up. And slowly, day by day, something inside me softened, not into weakness, into strength, a quieter, sturdier strength than anything Landon ever understood. I've had a lot of time to reflect, and there are a few lessons I wish someone had whispered to me years ago, lessons I now want to whisper to anyone listening who might meet them too. You are not dramatic or overreacting just because someone taught you to shrink. Silence is not peace. It's the absence of permission to speak. A partner who chips away at your confidence is not confused or stressed. They're showing you exactly who they are. You don't owe anyone the version of yourself that makes them comfortable. Those truths took me years to learn, but they changed everything. Today, I'm not the woman who stood trembling in a courtroom while Landon smirked. I'm not the woman who begged for patience, understanding, or basic decency. I'm someone new, someone grounded, someone who knows without hesitation that walking away can sometimes be the most powerful form of staying true to yourself. And if you're somewhere in your own version of that journey, whether you're at the beginning, the middle, or just starting to imagine the exit, I want you to hear this. You are stronger than the story you're leaving behind, and your life is waiting for you on the other side of the hardest decision. Thank you for spending this time with me and for allowing me to share something so deeply personal. It means more than you know. If this story touched you, moved you, or even made you think of someone you love, please do me a favor and tap that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It takes 2 seconds, and it helps these stories reach women who are silently searching for proof that they're not alone.